When Ted Horace rejoined his three friends, he gave a grim little chuckle before saying, "Did you hear the old boy? If we get back alive, we'll face a court-martial for refusing to obey orders. On the field of battle." "Sort of heads we lose, tails they win, eh?" China said, spitting out the match end he had been chewing. "Did I hear him saying he was going to take your stripes off you?" "If he did, and he didn't," Ted Horace snapped, "it wouldn't make any difference here. And don't think this is going to be a picnic. We've no water, and if I had a drink now it'd turn to steam in my throat. We've no food, we've got pistols and nothing else." "I've got a grenade," China put in. "We're sort of lone wolves," Ted went on. "We'll get no help from outside. Leastways not for 10 days or a fortnight, if then. If you want to live, you'll do exactly as I say, at the double, and no arguing. Get that? No arguing. If any of you think you can do better than Sergeant Horace, now's the time to say your little piece." There was a silence which lasted about 15 seconds. "Well," Ted growled, "we'll decide on a course of action." "Now that's talking sense," Sam Foster murmured. "You blokes must be thirsty, and I saw old Pom Pom take a water bottle over to the Major." "You can forget that." Ted's tone left no doubt as to what he meant. "If we drink, it'll be water we get for ourselves." "You'll tell the Major we're here, won't you?" Sam suggested diffidently. "No. If he knows we've stayed behind, he'll try and insist that we share the water," Ted explained. "We don't want that. A wounded man needs lashings of water. We've managed without a drink for about 10 years, China suggested. "We're going back to the coast road," Ted told them. "That's the only place where we can be sure of finding something to drink. So, if you lads are ready, I reckon we'll make a start." "And leave the Major by himself?" Sam Foster's voice showed the worry he felt. "Well, there isn't a thing we can do for him," Ted explained. "He's got all the water there is. He's under cover, so he won't get the sun when morning comes. We might get water tonight, but if we do, we'll probably have to hole up and wait for darkness before we can move back again. If we don't find water, then we'll all be queuing up to shake hands with St. Peter at the pearly gates. If we get water and maybe food, then we can start planning to do something for the Major." "Just one thing, Sarge." China caught Ted's arm as they started to move off. "Hadn't we better make sure everybody is loaded up? These Smith & Wessons are going to be the Fighting Four's best friends. And a passport to the next meal." They checked their revolvers, slid the safety catches on, buttoned their holster flaps, then started what was to be one of the worst walks of their lives. It was 12 miles as the crow flies to the coast road, but with the exception of Sam Foster, they had already walked more than that distance. They had not eaten, nor had a drink, for more than 24 hours. They were as tough a bunch as could be found in any army, but there is a limit to human endurance. By the time they came out on a ridge overlooking the coast road, they were all pretty well at the end of their tether. The night was well advanced, and as the four sat down to rest, each was thinking the same thing. No sign of traffic showed below them, and they were wondering if they could see anything before morning came. Along the road at intervals, the Germans had rest houses where transport could pull in for a meal and a rest. The stars shone brightly from a sky which had no cloud at all. It was so clear, and the Mediterranean was so like an inland lake, that the star sheen could be distinguished on the water. Somewhere farther down the coast a hungry jackal howled, and the mournful keening note sent shivers down Sam Foster's spine. "I wonder how Sheffield Wednesday are doing this season," Curly croaked. "Our Bert was saying in his last letter that they had got a centre forward." "Hi, here comes our meal ticket," China whispered, and rose with the grace of a panther. A few moments before he had been slumped like the others, bone weary. Now it seemed as if somebody had injected new life into him. The others followed him down the slope as away to the northwest a thin glow rose and dipped as a vehicle ran over a patch of the road where heavy traffic had made the surface wavy. "Now don't forget," Ted Horace whispered. "You sit tight while I go out on the road. You know what to do, whichever way it goes." "I still think it'd be better if I went onto the road," Sam Foster protested. "I'm not as quick on the trigger as you lot are, and—" "Can't risk you, Sam," Ted replied. "If we ever get a wireless set, and we might, who'd do the dots and dashes if you were scuppered? Don't worry, I'll be all right. There isn't a Jerry breathing who is expecting trouble right now. With old Rommell sitting just outside Alex, they've all got their tails up and think they can't lose." Even as they were talking, they were scuttling down the hillside and were in a position when a lorry came round the bend in the road, its headlights on. Even Curly, dour Yorkshireman and the one who normally took everything in his stride, sucked in a quick breath as Sergeant Ted Harris hurried into the middle of the road, waving his arms up and down in a stop signal. It seemed impossible for the driver not to realise this man was neither German nor yet Italian. What the three watchers failed to realise was that the man behind the wheel and his armed escort were tired. They were not expecting a Britisher to come out on the road, and thirdly, in the headlights Ted Harris in his desert-soiled shirts and shorts looked very much like a German soldier. The driver dipped his headlights so that the beams concentrated on Ted, and a moment later began to slow up. Ted stepped to one side, the side farthest away from the trio hidden by the roadside. It meant that whoever was in the driver's cab would have to look away from the side where the attack would be made. The lorry ground to a halt, and as the engine died, there was a quick, rather nervous babble of voices. There were two Italians in the cab, and both were asking Ted what he wanted and who he was at the same time. China Brown went round the back of the lorry, his one remaining grenade in his left hand, his revolver in his right. The safety pin had been pulled from the grenade, so that he only needed to open his hand to start the fuse. Then there would be 5 seconds before the explosion. Curly Bates and Sam leapt out of the ditch. While Sam stood to one side, Curly heaved himself onto the lorry step and poked his revolver muzzle into the side of the driver, who was leaning over towards the other door, trying to get a glimpse of the man who had stopped them. "Don't look round, pal, but you've been followed," he growled. As he spoke, a vehicle appeared round the bend to the southeast, coming towards them. Its headlights were on and the beams lit up the cab completely. The Italian into whose ribs Curly had thrust his gun muzzle turned excitedly, his eyes flashing. Then, as he saw the Britisher's face, dirty, with a stubble of beard on it, his lower jaw dropped and his eyes seemed almost ready to pop out of their sockets. He gave a little yelp, half scream, half squeal, and his hands went above his head so violently that he hit the top of the cab and took the skin off his knuckles. His companion, who had been menacing Sergeant Harris with a heavy caliber automatic, turned at the yelp and swung his gun round. He too gave a yelp of amazement and pain. Curly had rapped him across the knuckles with the muzzle of his revolver. Curly was wearing his usual headgear, a woolen cap comforter. His round face, which creased into a smile so easily, was not smiling now. To the Italians he looked like the picture of death. His eyes were hard and menacing, the stubble on his chin, lit up now as the approaching truck grew rapidly nearer, gave him an even more ferocious expression. Without a word, the two men slumped down into their seats as Ted Harris heaved himself up into the cab with them. Ted had drawn his revolver now. "One squeak," he said quietly, "and you've had your chips. Kaput. You understand?" Two pairs of terror-glazed eyes blinked once. Two heads bobbed to show they understood, and the approaching lorry drew level, past them, and at the same moment brakes squealed. Someone in the other lorry had decided there was something suspicious about the halted lorry. "Drive," Ted growled, and to Curly, "See what's happening. If anybody gets out, let them have it." Curly heaved himself round and took one quick glance along the side of the vehicle, then whipped his head in to gasp, "Corps Sarge, we would. It's full of troops and they're getting whoomp." There was a blinding flash, which lit up the road. The Italian driver stabbed his finger on the starter button and the engine came to life. He let in his clutch even as his gear lever slid into first gear and the lorry jumped like a frightened horse. In the back of the lorry, China Brown looked back at what his hand grenade had done. For him it had been a moment of quick thinking. He had seen the lorry grind to a skidding stop, and then there had come a shout, and some of the 20 German soldiers dozing in the back of the lorry had started to get up to obey a command from their officer to inspect the Italian-driven lorry. It was then that Curly tossed his last grenade out. It struck the ground, bounced a little and exploded. It was a perfect example of good throwing and timing, for the full force of the explosion was under the back axle. The lorry gave the nearest suggestion of a jump upwards, then the back axle snapped. The troops who had been dozing were wide awake now, and struggled to get out before the next grenade was tossed among them. The driver, unaware that his axle was gone, slipped into first gear and let in his clutch. There was a grinding of metal, and that was that. By the time the first of the German soldiers had gathered their wits enough to fire at the Italian-driven truck, the darkness had hidden them. With his foot hard down on the accelerator and his engine in first gear, the terrified driver of the captured truck might have easily blown his engine to bits, if Ted had not slapped him on the knee and indicated that he should change out of bottom gear. They travelled about a mile before Ted called a halt. "You okay in the back, China?" he asked. "Yeah, and Sam's here. Get that, Sarge? Sam? If he hadn't have been nippy on his feet, you'd have left him." "Sorry, Sam," Ted apologised. "What's in the truck? Grub?" "No, can't say for certain, but it looks like a load of landmines to me. Is there nothing in the cab? I'm just paralysed for a drink." The two Italians could speak a little English, and when Ted asked them for food and drink, they began chattering away like a cage full of monkeys. Ted clapped a hand over the driver's mouth, then nodded to the guard. "Okay, now we want food and water. Savvy? What have you got?" There were 2 jerry cans of fresh water, a half bottle of Chianti wine, but no food. The guard explained that 4 or 5 kilometres farther along there was a rest house where transport drivers could obtain a meal at any time of day or night. A jerry can of water was passed to China and Sam. For the next 5 minutes the only sounds were those of water gurgling as the fighting four first washed out their mouths, then drank slowly. They knew well enough the danger of gulping down pints of water. While Curly was drinking, Ted examined the cab, and after recovering the guard's automatic, he relieved that man of several cardboard cartons of ammunition. Then his eyes lit up as he saw clipped to the ceiling of the cab 2 Tommy gun type automatic weapons. His eyes were gleaming as he jerked them free from their clips. "Just what the doctor ordered, Curly," he murmured, checking the mechanism with practised hands, while the Italians shrank back as if scared the guns might suddenly go off in a stream of lead. There were magazines for the Tommy guns in a box behind the driver's seat. "Okay, we'll go," Ted decided. "No point in messing about here. There'll be trouble when the next vehicle comes along and gets the dope from the lorry busted up. Listen, Mussolini, what is there at the rest house? Is there a guard?" 2 heads were shaken emphatically. The driver explained that vehicles just drove into the car park and then the driver and his mate would go inside for a meal. He agreed that there should be a guard, but because they were so far from the fighting front, no one ever bothered. "I hope you are telling the truth," Ted said grimly, "because you'll be sat here with us when we drive up, and if anybody starts shooting, you know what is going to happen." And he prodded the nearest Italian with the captured automatic. "No guard, signor, no guard," the man protested, "and if anyone speaks, I answer him, yes." That satisfied Ted, and when they had driven another mile along the road, he ordered the Italians to get out. Wagging a finger at them, he said ferociously, "And you'd better lie low until morning, boys. There's a big raid planned, and if you go anywhere near the rest house before sunrise, you might never get back to Italy. Savvy?" 2 heads nodded, and 2 grateful Italians melted away into the darkness as Ted got into gear and drove down the road. He had switched on his headlights. It was just as well they did, for a moment or so later 3 trucks carrying troops going to Tripoli for a rest passed them. The drivers dipped their lights in salute. Ted dipped his, and all 4 Britishers grinned and blew out sighs of relief. 5 minutes later they saw the rest house. Parked in front of it were a number of vehicles. 2 big petrol tankers, some 30 CWT lorries, 2 staff cars and half a dozen water bowsers. Vital equipment in a land where water was so scarce. Ted parked his stolen lorry at the edge of the car park facing east. If the need arose, they were right for a quick getaway. Standing by the side of the lorry, they looked towards the rest house. Before the war it had been a nice little hotel, but either a British or a German bomb had demolished half of it. The windows were blacked out, but chinks of light showed, telling of at least 2 rooms on the ground floor still lit up. Ted handed Curly one of their captured Tommy guns and 3 spare magazines. "If anything goes wrong, just keep him busy until we get to the lorry. In case we have to leave you behind, make back for the Wadi. We're going to search the cab of these vehicles. We'll see if we can get any grub and some water bottles. When we're ready to move, I'll start whistling Lily Marlene, and then I'll start the engine, okay?" "Okay. I think I'd better have one of those jerry cans, Ted." "Not so much of the Ted. Sergeant Harris, if you don't mind," Ted snapped. "We're on duty now, and don't you forget it." He thumped Curly politely on the shoulder, then turned to get one of the jerry cans of water out for the bald-headed Yorkshireman. To Curly the night seemed suddenly very quiet and lonely as he stood there, a jerry can of water by his side, the Italian automatic weapon in his right hand. Far away he could hear the drone of aircraft, perhaps British bombers on their way to drop a load of eggs on Tripoli harbour. He looked up, but there was nothing to see but a galaxy of stars. He could see the 7 stars of the Great Bear, and his glance went automatically to the North Star. Some months of grueling exercise on the Scottish moors had gone into the training of men like Curly and his three friends, and one of the things they had been taught was how to find their way by the stars. His thoughts were brought back to the present by the sudden chunk of metal on metal from a nearby truck. It sounded very loud in the quiet, and Curly turned to stare towards the rest house, just to make sure no one had heard the clatter and came out to see what was going on. Then far away, he heard the muted roar of an engine. For a moment or so he could not make up his mind whether the sound came from the east or the west. The sound grew rapidly louder, and now he knew it came from the west. Something was approaching on the road they had just come. And that means they'll have seen the broken down lorry, he decided. I'd better have a word with Ted. Even as he was deciding what to do, there came the first few bars of the very popular German tune, Lily Marlene. It came over the air every night to the German soldiers, a catchy tune which had quickly been taken up by the soldiers of the 8th Army. Now the melody was being whistled to warn Curly to get to the lorry. Ted Harris had well earned his 3 stripes. He was tough, cool, clear-headed and quick-thinking. The moment he realised where that engine sound came from, he knew they had to get out quickly. The alarm would have been given by the men in the broken-down troop car and lorry. As Ted started his engine, the lights of a fast-moving vehicle appeared some 150 yards to the west. Its headlights were like small searchlights for brilliance, lighting up the road so that nothing could have moved out from the rest house car park without being seen. China, sitting in the lorry by the side of Ted Harris, aimed a quick short burst of fire at the approaching headlamps, hoping to put them out and thus give them a chance to get away in the darkness. "Oh, China," Ted growled, and switched off his engine. "I thought you could handle any sort of gun." The Italian submachine gun might have been good at extremely short range, but over 100 yards had failed China. The lights did not even blink. There was a screaming of brakes, and as the engine song died away, there came a patter of boots on the road as men dropped out the back of a lorry. At the same time, the front door of the rest house was thrown wide open, and a beam of yellow light, like a path, cut the darkness. 3 men dived out, each with a gun in his hands. They catapulted to one side, out of the light, ready for anything. Curly, who had been hurrying across to join Ted and the others, turned smartly and hose-piped the front of the rest house with a quick burst of fire. Then he dropped flat. That quick move down saved his life, for from the shadows behind the lorry, the headlights of which were still lighting up the road, there came a perfect storm of fire. For this night at least, it looked as if Lady Luck had deserted the fighting foe, just when they needed her most.